This is how we thought of space. A battle against gravity. A fight for every single inch, paid for in fire and failure and fuel. To leave our world, we built the biggest, most powerful chemical engines imaginable. And they carried us to the moon, to the planets. But they also revealed a terrible truth, that our greatest achievements were barely a single step off the front porch. The moon is a weekend trip. Mars, a journey of months. But the stars, the nearest star, is so far away that our fastest probes, like Voyager, would take over 70,000 years to reach it. We are, and have always been, trapped, caged in our own solar system by a law of physics as unforgiving as time itself, a law called the rocket equation. But what if? What if we stopped trying to fight gravity? What if we stopped using fire and started using the fire, the elemental cosmic power locked inside the atom itself? In 1957, at the very height of the Cold War, a small, secret group of America's brightest minds looked at this image, the symbol of total annihilation, and saw something else. They didn't see an ending. They saw a beginning. They saw a way out. They saw a colossal, 4,000-ton spaceship, a ship that would carry an entire city to Mars in 6 weeks. A ship that would reach Saturn by 1970. A ship that would ride a continuous, terrifying, rhythmic pulse of nuclear bombs. This was not science fiction. It was not a joke. It was a fully funded, top-secret U.S. government program. They called it Project Orion. This is the story of the most audacious, brilliant, and terrifying machine that humanity ever dared to design. And the two men, a bomb maker and a dreamer, who tried to ride the atom to the stars.
To understand the madness of Project Orion, you must first understand the prison it was designed to break. It is called the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation, and it is the cruelest law in engineering. The equation is simple. To go faster, you need more fuel, but that fuel has mass. So now you need more fuel to lift the fuel, and that fuel has mass. So you need more fuel to lift the fuel that's lifting the fuel. It's an exponential trap, a law of diminishing returns. For every small gain in speed, you must pay a catastrophic penalty in mass. Our grandest rockets, the Saturn V, the Space Shuttle, they are not sleek ships. They are fragile payloads strapped to the back of controlled explosions. They are 90% propellant, just to throw a tiny, desperate capsule into the void. In the 1950s, engineers like Wernher von Braun knew this. Their plans to reach Mars weren't single ships. They were armadas, dozens of launches, just to assemble one ship in orbit, piece by agonizing piece. It was slow, expensive, and fragile. The solar system, it seemed, would be conquered not with a leap, but with a crawl. We were stuck, and in 1957, being stuck was not an option. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, it wasn't just a satellite, it was a threat, a red star, circling the globe, a constant reminder that the United States was behind. The Cold War was now a space race, and America needed more than a foothold. It needed a leap. It needed to break the equation. The idea had been floating in the atomic ether for years. It began, as many atomic ideas did, at Los Alamos. In 1946, the mathematician Stanislaw Ulam, one of the co-fathers of the hydrogen bomb, was recovering from brain surgery. He was bored, so he did calculations in his head. He wondered, What if you dropped a small atomic bomb, and then a split second later dropped a second one right behind it? The blast from the second would push the first. What if you did it a third time, a fourth? Ulam's calculations were crude, but then, in the mid-1950s, a man named Ted Taylor, another Los Alamos physicist, heard the idea. And for Taylor, this wasn't just a thought experiment, it was a blueprint. The concept was almost comically simple. Imagine a tin can. Now tape a firecracker to it. The explosion propels the can, but it also destroys it. Now what if the can was a steel plate, 1,000-ton steel plate? And what if the firecracker was a nuclear bomb? And what if you didn't tape it to the plate, but instead detonated it 100 feet away? The bomb explodes, a wave of plasma, a sun in miniature, slams into the plate. The plate recoils, absorbing the kick. Then, a second later, another bomb, another kick, then another, and another. It was propulsion by pulse, a spacecraft that would ride a series of nuclear detonations, one after another, like a piston engine, an engine where the pistons were made of pure atomic fire. It was brutal, it was terrifying, and according to the math, it worked. It didn't just bend the rocket equation, it shattered it. The energy released by nuclear fission is millions of times greater than the energy of chemical combustion. With this much power, the tyranny of the rocket equation vanishes. Your fuel is so potent that the ship's payload could be thousands of tons. You weren't building a fragile capsule. You were building an ark, a battleship, a flying city. But to turn this cosmic firecracker concept into a machine, you needed two very different kinds of genius. You needed a man who knew, better than anyone alive, how to build the bombs. And you needed a man who had the audacity to dream of where they could take us.
This is Theodore Taylor. He is perhaps the most important nuclear weapons designer you have never heard of. In the 1950s, while others were focused on building city-destroying superbombs, Ted Taylor was obsessed with the opposite. He wanted to make them small. Working at Los Alamos, he became the undisputed master of miniaturization. He designed Davy Crockett, a nuclear warhead so small it could be fired from a Jeep. He designed warheads that could fit inside artillery shells. He was a prodigy, a virtuoso of fission. But this mastery came at a terrible price. Taylor understood, with more clarity than almost anyone, what he had unleashed. He saw a future where his own tiny, efficient creations were no longer just in the hands of superpowers, but in the hands of anyone. He was haunted by his own genius. Ted Taylor was a man desperate for redemption. He was looking for a way to use his dark, terrible knowledge for something good.
I've had this feeling for a long time that the things I designed were so awful that I had to find a way to make them useful, to do something that wasn't just about killing people.
When he heard the Orion concept, it was an epiphany. This was it. This was the good use. He wouldn't just build bombs, he would build engines. Taylor left Los Alamos and joined a small private company in California called General Atomics. And in 1957, he convinced them, and soon after, the US government's Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, to give him money. Project Orion was born. Ted Taylor was its heart. He was the pragmatist, the engineer, the man who knew the black art of bomb design. He knew how to shape their charges, how to make them clean, how to make them efficient. He was the man who would build the firecracker. But he needed a visionary. He needed someone who could see past the explosions and toward the destination.
His name was Freeman Dyson. If Ted Taylor was the artisan of the atomic age, Freeman Dyson was its poet. A British transplant, Dyson was a physicist's physicist. A resident at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, he walked in the footsteps of Einstein. He was a man who thought in concepts of cosmic scale. He wasn't just interested in physics, he was interested in destiny. Dyson believed, with an almost religious fervor, that humanity's future was not on Earth, that we were meant to spread, to inhabit the solar system, to become a multi-planetary species.
A species that remains on a single planet is doomed to extinction sooner or later. The choice is simple: to stagnate and perish, or to spread out into the universe.
When Ted Taylor approached him to join Orion, Dyson saw not just a machine, but the key, the one single technology that could unlock the solar system in his own lifetime. He didn't see a bomb pusher. He saw a Noah's Ark, a ship that could carry a self-sustaining colony, a piece of Earth's biosphere, to a new home. The partnership was perfect. Taylor, the pragmatic engineer, would focus on the how to build the plate, how to shape the charges, how to make it work. Dyson, the visionary physicist, would focus on the why, how to ensure stability, how to protect the crew, how to chart a course to Saturn. Together, these two men, the bomb maker haunted by his past and the physicist dreaming of the future, began to design the most spectacular and terrifying vehicle in human history. Their home was not a sprawling military base or a secret government bunker. It was a new, private company in San Diego called General Atomics. Founded by a visionary nuclear physicist, Frederick D. Huffman, General Atomics was designed to be a skunkworks for the atomic age, a place where brilliant minds could pursue radical ideas, funded by the deep pockets of the US government, but free from its bureaucratic red tape. This was the era of big science. DARPA, the Air Force, and even the new civilian agency, NASA, were pouring billions into any idea that seemed to promise a strategic advantage. Inside General Atomics, the Orion team was small, elite, and utterly secret. They worked in a building known only as The Point. They were given a budget that, in today's money, would stretch into the tens of millions. Their official cover story? They were designing a nuclear-powered orbital glider. Their reality? They were designing a battleship for the stars. And the first step was to figure out how to ride the shockwave without being vaporized. This is the heart of the Orion, the pusher plate. It is not a nozzle. It is not an engine. It is an anvil. It was Ted Taylor's first and greatest challenge. The plate would have to survive a nuclear detonation, a blast hotter than the surface of the sun every single second. A conventional material would melt, it would crack, it would be vaporized in an instant. The team's calculations showed that 85% of the bomb's energy would arrive as a plasma, a superheated gas of vaporized bomb debris, traveling at tens of thousands of miles per second. So, how do you stop a sun? The answer was brilliantly simple. You don't. You let the plate get hit, and then you let it burn. The team's solution was ablation. Just before the plasma wave hit, The plate would be coated with a thin layer of graphite grease or oil. The plasma strikes this layer. The oil instantly vaporizes, absorbing the catastrophic heat. This sacrificial layer becomes a new wave of gas, exploding away from the plate. It's Newton's third law. The outward exploding oil creates an equal and opposite reaction, pushing the plate forward. The plate itself, built of thick steel or aluminum, would barely even get warm. It wasn't surviving the blast, it was using it. It was a shield that turned the enemy's weapon into its own propulsion. It was physics as judo.
But this created a new problem. The kick from each blast would be titanic, a force of millions of pounds delivered in 1,000th of a second. If the crew compartment was bolted directly to the plate, the G-force would turn everyone inside into a thin red paste.
The ride would be uncomfortable. The problem was to turn a series of sharp, violent kicks into a smooth, gentle push, like a cosmic pogo stick with the world's best suspension.
This was Freeman Dyson's domain. He and the team designed a colossal two-stage shock absorption system. The first stage was mechanical, giant gas-filled pistons that would absorb the initial brutal shock. The plate would slam backwards several feet, compressing the gas, which would then bounce back, ready for the next pulse. But this entire assembly was itself mounted on second sets of shock absorbers, longer, slower, pneumatic springs that connected to the main crew habitat. The result, the plate would clang back and forth once every second. But for the crew, 500 feet away in the habitat, it would feel like a smooth, continuous acceleration, a gentle, constant push of 1 or 2 Gs. You could walk around. You could pour a cup of coffee. You would have artificial gravity all the way to Mars, courtesy of 1,000 nuclear bombs detonating right behind you.
The final piece of the puzzle was the fuel. The Orion team stopped calling them bombs. They were nuclear pulse units, and they would need a lot of them. Ted Taylor, the master of miniaturization, designed them. They weren't crude, massive weapons. They were small, efficient fission devices, some weighing only a few hundred pounds. More importantly, they were shaped charges. When the unit detonated, it was designed to channel most of its plasma forward in a focused cone, aimed directly at the center of the pusher plate. This maximized efficiency. Almost none of the blast was wasted. These pulse units would be stored in a massive automated magazine at the back of the ship, near the plate. Think of it as a colossal, nuclear-powered vending machine. A clockwork mechanism would drop a unit into a gun. A blast of gas would fire it. It detonates, the ship lurches forward. One pulse every second, for hours, for days. A trip to Mars would require nearly 2,000 pulse units. A trip to Saturn, 4,000. It was a machine of relentless, thundering atomic power. It was no longer a theory. It was a complete engineered design. And in 1959, in a quiet, secret test, they proved it could fly.
Before they could play with atoms, they had to start with chemistry. Before they could build a colossus, they had to build a putt-putt. This was the test site at Point Loma, California. The Orion team, led by Ted Taylor, began building their first real-world models. They were crude, small metal discs, barely a few feet across. They couldn't use nuclear pulse units, of course, so they used the next best thing, high explosives, C4, RDX. The first tests were failures. The explosions were too powerful or too off-center. The models would flip, cartwheel, and tear themselves apart. This is where Freeman Dyson's calculations became critical. He had theorized that stability was the key. The explosions had to be precisely timed, and the center of mass had to be perfectly managed. The team went back to the workshop. They recalibrated. They balanced their models. They engineered a system to drop and detonate small shaped charges, one after another, with the precision of a Swiss watch. They were building, in effect, a machine gun that fired explosions to propel a steel plate.
This was Hot Rod. It was also known, affectionately, as the Putt-Putt. In November 1959, the team was ready. They placed Hot Rod on its pad. This was not a test of a single part. This was a test of the entire system. The timed charge delivery, the pusher plate, the stability. The first charge detonates. The craft leaps into the air. A second later, the second charge. The craft doesn't tumble. It corrects itself. It climbs. Then the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth. In 6 seconds, propelled by 6 conventional explosions, the Hot Rod flew to an altitude of over 100 meters, its flight perfectly stable, perfectly controlled. It was a profound moment, a turning point. The men on the ground, Taylor, Dyson, the entire team, they had just watched a machine fly on a series of controlled, detached explosions. The physics was real. The engineering was sound. Pulse propulsion was not a fantasy. It worked. Now, all they had to do was scale it up by a factor of several thousand.
The Hot Rod weighed about 300 pounds. The baseline Orion vehicle, the conservative design, would weigh 4,000 tons. This was the ship Ted Taylor and Freeman Dyson presented to the U.S. government. It would be over 20 stories tall, taller than the Statue of Liberty. At its base, a pusher plate 40 meters or 130 feet wide, forged from 300 tons of solid steel. Behind it, the colossal shock absorbers, as large as bank vaults, designed to tame the force of a nuclear bomb detonating every second. And above that, the payload. This is what broke the rocket equation. The payload wasn't a tiny, cramped capsule for 3 men. The payload was 1,600 tons. It could carry a crew of 150 people. It could carry an entire military base. It could carry enough supplies, landers, and equipment to build a self-sustaining colony in a single launch. It was, in every sense of the word, an ark. The ship would be a small town. It would have workshops, laboratories, medical bays, and living quarters. Its nuclear pulse engine would provide so much excess energy that the ship would be bathed in electricity. It wouldn't be a cold, cramped tin can. It would be a piece of earth lifted whole and hurled into the void.
To understand what this ship could do, you must forget everything you know about space travel. A chemical rocket is a slave to gravity. It must be thrown from Earth at just the right moment, coasting on a slow, efficient elliptical orbit. It's a journey of 8 months to Mars, one way. Orion was not a slave. It made its own gravity. It would launch from the ground. Dyson and Taylor favored Jackass Flats, Nevada, rising on a pillar of 2,000 low-yield nuclear bombs. It would not coast to Mars. It would fly to Mars.
It would accelerate continuously, pushing the crew into their couches with a constant 1g of gravity. Then, at the halfway point, it would flip 180 degrees and fire its bombs forward, decelerating into Martian orbit. The travel time? 6 weeks. The team presented a clear timeline to the Air Force. "Fund us now," they said. "We will have an unmanned test vehicle in orbit by 1963. We will land a crew on the moon by 1965. We will land a 150-person colony on Mars by 1968. We will reach the moons of Saturn by 1970. This was the grand promise of Project Orion, not just to visit the solar system, but to conquer it, to open the frontier not for a few elite pilots, but for an entire civilization. And for Freeman Dyson, even this was just the beginning. For Freeman Dyson, the 4,000-ton conservative ship was just the orbital runabout. The real goal was the Super Orion, the interstellar arc. This ship would weigh 8 million tons. Its pusher plate would be 400 meters, a quarter mile across. Its payload would be millions of tons, enough to carry 20,000 people, a city, a true self-sustaining multi-generational colony. And it would not be powered by fission pulse units. It would be powered by hydrogen bombs. With the power of fusion, Dyson calculated the Super Orion could accelerate to 3% the speed of light. 113. A one-way trip, but the ship was the destination. It was a Noah's Ark, launched from a Cold War Earth, carrying a seed of humanity to a new home.
This was the vision that drove us, the thought that our children and grandchildren would be able to go and find new worlds, not just as visitors, but as settlers. This was the one thing that made all the bombs, all the terror, worthwhile.
The team had the physics, they had the engineering, they had working, flying models. They had a plan to put human beings on Mars before Neil Armstrong even set foot on the moon. They had, in their hands, the literal key to the solar system. So, why are you hearing this story for the first time? Why are we still launching tiny capsules on chemical rockets? Why did the most advanced, most powerful, and practical spacecraft ever designed simply vanish? The answer is that the ship designed to save humanity was killed by the very thing it was built from: politics, bureaucracy, and fear. The engineers had solved the physics, they had solved the stability, they had even solved the shock absorption. But they were about to face a problem they could not engineer their way out of: Washington, D.C. Project Orion was born in a bureaucratic no man's land. It was a chimera, a scientific experiment that used nuclear bombs, a peaceful exploration vehicle that was funded by the military. Nobody knew who owned it. The Air Force, who provided much of the early funding, saw Orion as a potential military platform, a battleship that could dominate the high ground of space, perhaps even launch nuclear weapons from orbit. But Ted Taylor and Freeman Dyson, they were pitching it as a peaceful ship, a vehicle for science and colonization. This created a fundamental conflict. The Air Force wasn't interested in funding a Noah's Ark to Saturn. They wanted a weapon. We were constantly in this tug of war. The Air Force would ask, "Can it be used as a bombardment system?" And we'd say, "Yes, but think about Mars." It was a dance. We needed their money, but we didn't share their goals. So they turned to the new civilian agency, NASA. This should have been a perfect match. NASA was created to do big, bold things, to go to the planets. And the father of NASA's rocket program, Wernher von Braun, was a secret fan. He knew the limitations of his own chemical rockets and privately admitted that Orion was the only real way to open up the solar system. But NASA had an image problem. NASA was created in 1958 as a civilian agency precisely to separate America's space ambitions from the military's. Its entire public face was built on the idea of peaceful exploration for all mankind. The last thing NASA's leadership wanted was for their poster child, the astronaut, to be seen riding a pillar of atomic bombs. NASA was terrified of the word nuclear. They were trying to sell space to the American public as something clean, heroic, and non-threatening. Our ship was everything they were running away from. It was loud, it was messy, it was military, and it was nuclear. Orion was passed back and forth. The Air Force said it was too scientific. NASA said it was too warlike. It was a political orphan, and it was about to face an even bigger enemy, its own radioactive signature. From the beginning, there was one question that haunted the project. What about the fallout? You can't detonate 2,000 nuclear bombs, even small, clean ones, without radioactive consequences. Freeman Dyson, ever the honest physicist, did the calculations himself. He didn't hide the numbers. His math showed that a ground launch from Nevada would indeed release a measurable amount of radioactive fallout. The pulse units were designed to be clean, mostly fission with little long-term contamination. But little is not zero. Dyson calculated the human cost. His estimates, which he openly published within the project, suggested that every ground launch of a 4,000-ton Orion ship might cause between 1 and 10 cancer deaths globally from the distributed fallout.
It was a number. We had to face it. 1 to 10 deaths spread over the whole world. And the question was, is that a fair price to pay for opening the solar system? In my mind, yes. Compared to the deaths from coal mining or even from just building the ship, it was a small price, but it was not zero.
For 13 days in October 1962, the world stared into the nuclear abyss. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the United States and the Soviet Union closer to annihilation than they had ever been. When it was over, a profound sense of terror and sobriety settled over the planet. The world had seen the superweapon and realized it could never, ever be used. The top priority for President John F. Kennedy was not to weaponize space. It was to de-escalate the Cold War. The result was the Partial Test Ban Treaty of 1963. It was a landmark agreement. The US, UK, and Soviet Union all agreed to ban nuclear weapons tests in the atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater. It was the first critical step in pulling the world back from the brink. It was a triumph of diplomacy. And for Project Orion, it was a bullet to the head. The treaty made no distinction. It didn't say no weapons tests. It said no nuclear explosions, period. Orion's entire engine, its very design, was now illegal under international law. This is where the project's own secrecy became its doom. Ted Taylor and Freeman Dyson couldn't go to Congress. They couldn't write an op-ed in the New York Times. They couldn't lobby for a peaceful use exemption for nuclear pulse propulsion because almost nobody in the world knew what that was. The project was so top secret that it couldn't save itself.
So, salmon does have iron in it, but it's not a lot. There's better sources of iron.
The end was not a bang. It was a memo.
In 1964, the Air Force, seeing no path forward, officially pulled its funding. NASA, now in a full sprint race to the moon with its chemical Apollo program, had no interest in fighting Congress for a radioactive spaceship it never really wanted. The remaining funds for Orion were cut. The project was officially terminated in 1965. The models were put into storage. The blueprints, calculations, and test films, thousands of documents, were stamped classified and buried in government archives. Project Orion, the ship that promised Mars by 1965, simply vanished. Ted Taylor, the man who wanted to redeem the atom, left the company. He would spend the rest of his life as a passionate advocate for nuclear disarmament, trying to lock away the very genies he had once helped unleash. Freeman Dyson returned to Princeton. He would continue to write, to dream, to theorize about the future, but he would never again work on a practical starship. The Apollo program, powered by Werner Braun's chemical rockets, took center stage. And in 1969, humanity did reach another world.
Just one small step for man.
It was a triumph, a defining moment for the human species. But as Armstrong took that small step, the blueprints for a machine that could have taken a giant leap were already gathering dust in a classified vault. A machine that could have carried 150 people to the moon, landed, and returned in a single, colossal flight. The moon race was won, but the race to the solar system was abandoned.
The end of Orion wasn't just the end of a project. It was the end of an era of thinking. It was a fork in the road, and we chose the slower path. What did we lose? We lost scale. The Saturn V could lift 140 tons to orbit. The Orion base model could lift 1,600 tons. It wasn't just an improvement, it was a revolutionary leap. We lost power. An Apollo capsule had just enough electricity to run its radios and life support. An Orion ship with the waste heat from its pulse units would have had megawatts of power, enough to run radar systems, advanced laboratories, welding torches, an entire industrial workshop. We lost gravity. For 50 years, every astronaut we've sent to space has suffered the withering effects of zero-G, bone loss, muscle atrophy, compromised immune systems. Orion's constant 1G acceleration was artificial gravity. Its crew would have arrived at Mars healthy, strong, and ready to work. What if Orion hadn't been canceled? It's one of the greatest what-ifs of the 20th century. There is no question, if the project had continued, we would have a base on the moon. We would have a colony on Mars. We might, this very day, have research stations orbiting the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. We traded the entire solar system for a few flags on the moon.
But an idea that powerful never truly dies. Orion's core concept, propulsion by pulse, was too compelling to forget. In the 1970s, the British Interplanetary Society, a group of scientists and engineers, including some who knew of the classified Orion files, designed Project Daedalus. It was a robotic interstellar probe. Its engine? A tamed Orion. Instead of fission bombs, Daedalus would be powered by tiny, continuous fusion explosions ignited by electron beams. It was a direct intellectual descendant of Orion's pulse propulsion. The ghost of Orion lives on in modern concepts. Mini-Mag Orion imagines a smaller, magnetic field-contained version. Laser ablative propulsion, where a powerful laser from Earth blasts a sail, is just Orion's pusher plate concept, using light instead of plasma. Every serious proposal for interstellar travel, one that uses physics we know works, is just a variation on Orion's theme. Hit something. Hit it hard.
and ride the recoil.
In the end, the story of Project Orion leaves us with a paradox, a question we still haven't answered. Was Orion a brilliant, shining dream, a path to the stars that we foolishly abandoned? Was it our one lost chance to become a true interplanetary species? Or was it a terrifying nightmare, a grotesque monument to Cold War hubris, a plan to pave our way to space with the very weapons that threatened our survival? Were we right to abandon it, or were we cowards for not taming it?
I look back on it, and I'm still torn. It was beautiful. It was the grandest thing I ever worked on. But the power. Perhaps it was too much. Perhaps we weren't ready. I am still, to this day, disappointed. I believe we made a wrong turn. We chose the small, safe path. And we are still paying the price. The solar system was in our grasp, and we let it go.
Project Orion represents the ultimate paradox of the atomic age. The power to reach the stars was, and perhaps still is, inextricably linked to the power to destroy ourselves. We chose safety. We stayed home. And the stars remain impossibly far away.